The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a soft orange glow over the quaint little seaside town we had chosen for our anniversary getaway. I stood on the balcony of our hotel room, looking out at the waves crashing lazily against the shore. The sound of the water was soothing, almost meditative, and for a moment I allowed myself to enjoy the peace. It was supposed to be the perfect trip, a chance for my wife, Rachel, and me to reconnect. 10 years of marriage, and we hadn't taken a real vacation together in years. But as I turned back to look at Rachel, something felt off. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her face turned toward the window, but she wasn't really looking out at the view. Her expression was distant, almost as if she was lost in thought, or more accurately, avoiding eye contact. The light in the room was soft, casting long shadows across her face, but I could still see the subtle lines of worry forming between her brows. We had been married for 10 years, and I had never seen her like this before. "Rachel?" I called softly, trying to break the silence between us. She flinched slightly, then turned to me with a tight smile. "Yeah?" she said, her voice a little too light, a little too forced. "Are you okay?" I asked, my concern growing. "You've been quiet all day." She waved her hand dismissively, the smile fading just a little. "I'm fine, just tired. It's been a long trip." I didn't buy it. Not for a second. Something about her demeanor was off, and I had learned over the years that Rachel wasn't one to lie outright, but she was a master at deflecting, at changing the subject or pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. The odd thing was, it wasn't just today. Over the past few months, I had noticed subtle changes in her behavior. Slightly distant, always distracted when we were together, as if her mind was elsewhere. But this was different. This felt like a deeper kind of detachment, like she was holding something back, something important. We had met in college, and even in the early years of our marriage, Rachel had been open, vibrant, and full of life. But lately, I had seen a shift. It wasn't just the quietness or the distance, but the occasional nervous glance, the way her hands would tremble just a little when I touched her, the way she started looking at her phone whenever I walked into the room. It wasn't just a matter of not being present. It was like she was hiding something from me. I tried to push the thoughts out of my mind, telling myself that it was probably just stress. After all, we had both been juggling work, life, and responsibilities. But tonight was supposed to be about us, about rekindling what we had, about remembering why we fell in love in the first place. We had dinner reservations at a nice restaurant, and I'd planned for us to enjoy a bottle of wine, to laugh and talk about the old days, our honeymoon, our first house, our dreams for the future. I wanted to erase whatever had been hanging between us, but as the silence stretched on, I realized that wasn't going to be easy. "Rachel, look," I said gently, sitting next to her on the bed. I reached for her hand, my thumb brushing against her skin. "You don't have to tell me if you're not ready, but whatever's bothering you, I'm here. We're supposed to be in this together, right?" For a moment, I thought she might break down. Her eyes welled up, but she quickly blinked the tears away and took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "It's nothing, really," she said, forcing a laugh. "I guess I'm just being silly." I didn't press her further. If she wasn't ready to talk, I couldn't force her. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, deeply wrong. We left the hotel and walked down the cobbled streets to the restaurant. As we walked, I kept trying to shake the feeling that I was walking in the dark, that there was something lurking beneath the surface of our marriage that I didn't understand. Rachel had always been open with me, but lately she had become more closed off, more elusive. I couldn't help but wonder, was it me? Was I the one doing something wrong? Or was there something else at play here? Dinner was lovely, too lovely almost, the kind of romantic evening I had hoped for, yet Rachel seemed distant despite the beautiful setting. She barely touched her food and her eyes often wandered, like she was looking for something or someone else. I couldn't help but notice how her gaze shifted toward the door every time someone entered the restaurant. At one point, she excused herself to go to the bathroom. I sat alone at the table, swirling my glass of wine, trying to keep my mind focused on anything but the nagging suspicion that was growing inside me. The waiter brought the check, and I glanced at my watch. Rachel had been gone longer than I expected. I figured she must have run into someone she knew, But after a while, I started to feel uneasy. Just as I was about to get up and check on her, I saw her through the window. She was standing at the corner of the street, her back turned toward the restaurant. But it wasn't just her presence that caught my attention. It was the man standing beside her, the way he touched her arm, the way she leaned in close to him. My heart skipped a beat. It couldn't be. Not after everything we had been through. But there was no mistaking the intimacy in their posture, the closeness between them. I sat frozen, my blood running cold. The man was too familiar. I knew who he was. The phone in my hand felt like a stone, weighing down on my every thought. As I scrolled through the messages, I could feel the edges of my reality begin to warp. Every word Rachel had exchanged with Mark was like a slap, a painful reminder of how little I truly knew about her. The honeymoon, that fleeting moment in time when I had thought we were perfect, had always haunted me. But now it wasn't just a distant memory of a mistake. It was something far more present, more dangerous, something that had been alive all this time. I read the messages again, slower this time, letting each word sink in. Some of them were sweet, intimate even, while others were less subtle, flirtatious, teasing, full of longing. They had met for dinner, drinks, and who knew what else. They talked about their feelings for each other as if nothing had changed, as if the past hadn't happened, as if the vows Rachel had made to me meant nothing. And it wasn't just a few messages here and there. This had been an ongoing thing, a relationship she had kept hidden from me for months. She had gone to great lengths to hide it, to make sure I never found out. But now here it was, laid bare, undeniable. There was no escaping it. I slammed the phone down on the bed, my hands trembling as I tried to process what I had just discovered. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to confront her right then and there. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. I wasn't ready to face the truth, even though it was staring me in the face. Rachel had gone to the bathroom just before I found the messages. The door was still cracked open, the soft hum of the exhaust fan the only sound in the room. I knew she'd be back soon, and I wasn't sure how to handle this. My mind raced, running through every possible scenario, but each one felt like a nightmare. How could I approach her? What could I possibly say to make sense of what I had just uncovered? The truth was, there was no easy way. She had betrayed me, and there was no amount of rehearsing that could soften the blow. I could already feel the anger starting to bubble inside me, a slow burn that threatened to consume me. But I had to stay calm. I couldn't give in to the rage just yet. I needed to gather my thoughts. I stood up, pacing around the room, my fingers running through my hair as I tried to regain some semblance of control. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of what I had just learned. I looked at the door to the bathroom, knowing Rachel would be out any second, and I had no idea how to act. Should I pretend everything was normal? Or should I confront her right away? Before I could make up my mind, Rachel emerged from the bathroom. She was toweling her hair dry, her face relaxed as if she hadn't just stepped out of a meeting with a man who had been a part of her life in ways I had never known. She smiled at me, but there was something in her eyes, something that I couldn't quite place. But it unsettled me. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice soft, almost too soft. She seemed wary. I nodded quickly, trying to force the tension from my face. "Yeah, just tired. Been a long day." She stepped closer, still wiping her hair with the towel. "Yeah, me too," she said, her tone light. But there was an edge to it, like she was testing me. "I'm glad we're finally alone, though. It's been nice, just the two of us. It feels like we never get that anymore." I couldn't bring myself to smile back. Every word she spoke felt like a lie. We never got that time alone because she was always keeping something from me. I wanted to yell, to demand answers, but I couldn't, at least not yet. Instead, I just nodded again, unable to look her in the eye for too long. I wasn't sure what I was trying to avoid, the truth, her gaze, or both. She seemed oblivious, or maybe she was pretending to be. It was hard to tell. Rachel finished drying her hair and tossed the towel into the bathroom. Then, without warning, she reached for the lamp on the nightstand and turned it off, plunging the room into darkness except for the faint light from the street outside filtering through the curtains. "I'm going to bed," she said, climbing into the bed beside me. Her body pressed against mine, warm and familiar, but it only made the distance between us feel even more pronounced. The act felt like a performance, a mask she had put on for me, but I couldn't ignore the reality that hung between us. She had been lying to me for God knows how long. The betrayal felt suffocating. I lay there, wide awake, my heart racing. Rachel's breathing was slow and steady beside me, but I couldn't find any peace. How could I sleep knowing what I knew now? How could I pretend like everything was fine? Every breath she took felt like a reminder of the secret she was keeping. I wanted to confront her, to demand the truth, but I had no idea how to begin. The anger that had been building inside me was almost too much to bear. I turned onto my side, facing away from her, and closed my eyes, willing myself to fall asleep. But sleep wouldn't come. Not now. Not while the truth was still fresh in my mind. The sound of her steady breathing was the only thing that kept me tethered to reality. But even that felt like an illusion. How had I let this happen? How had I been so blind? Tomorrow. I would wait until tomorrow. The truth would come out. I would get the answers I deserved. But for now, I had to live with the knowledge that the woman I loved, my wife, had been lying to me for months. And I wasn't sure how I was going to live with that. The darkness in the room felt suffocating, thick with unspoken words and unanswered questions. I lay there, my back turned to Rachel, unable to shake the whirlwind of emotions that had taken root inside me. The anger was still there, raw and jagged, but it was tempered by something deeper, something colder. I couldn't trust her anymore. I couldn't trust any of it. Our life, our memories, everything now felt like a facade, a carefully constructed lie. As I stared at the shadows on the ceiling, my mind replayed the messages I had found. The words, the photos, the promises Rachel had made and then broken. "It's over," she had said so many times. But now I knew the truth. It had never been over. She had just gotten better at hiding it. The room felt smaller now, as if the walls themselves were closing in around me. Rachel's steady breathing beside me should have been comforting, but instead it felt like a constant reminder of the betrayal. I could feel the heat of her body next to mine, but it only made the distance between us seem wider, like a chasm that I couldn't bridge. I wasn't sure how much time passed, but eventually, exhaustion began to creep in. My thoughts, though tumultuous, slowed enough for me to drift into a restless sleep, filled with fleeting dreams and half-formed images of Rachel with Mark, her laughter echoing in my ears, mocking me. The next morning I woke up before Rachel, the sunlight streaming through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the room. She was still sleeping, her face peaceful and unaware. For a moment I considered pretending nothing had changed, acting like the last few hours hadn't happened. But the weight of the truth made that impossible. How could I look at her without knowing what I now knew? How could I let her continue to lie to me? I got out of bed as quietly as I could, careful not to wake her. The phone was still in her purse. I reached for it again, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what I was hoping to find. More messages, more proof. But something inside me couldn't stop. The need to know everything, to understand the full extent of her betrayal, was overwhelming. The phone buzzed as soon as I unlocked it, and my heart skipped a beat. A new message from Mark. I opened it, my breath catching as I read the words. It wasn't a message meant for me to see, not directly, but it felt like a slap. It was a casual message, a joke, but there was an intimacy to it, an unspoken connection that stung. Rachel's response followed quickly, just as casual, but there was something in her words. Something coded, something that made it clear they weren't just friends. This was a secret life she had been leading, one I had no part in. I put the phone down again, my hands shaking. I wanted to throw it against the wall, to destroy it, but I didn't. Instead, I sat down on the edge of the bed, running my hands through my hair, trying to focus, trying to breathe. The rage was bubbling up inside me, but I had to hold it in. I couldn't confront her now, not like this. I turned toward the window, staring at the view of the city outside. The sun was rising, the world moving on as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had shifted. I wasn't the same man I had been just 24 hours ago. I wasn't the same husband, This discovery had shattered something inside me, and I wasn't sure how to put the pieces back together. Rachel stirred behind me, and I heard her soft voice call out, "You up?" I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "Yeah, just needed some air." She sat up in bed, her silhouette framed by the light from the window. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice tentative. She must have sensed something in my tone, something that made her pause. I didn't answer at first. How could I? What could I possibly say when everything I thought I knew was now in question? I turned to face her, forcing a smile, but it felt more like a mask than anything genuine. "Nothing, just thinking." She blinked, her expression unreadable. "Thinking about what?" I stared at her for a moment, struggling to keep my emotions in check. "Just us. Everything. I feel like we've been distant lately." Her lips parted, as though she wanted to say something, but then she hesitated. I could see it. The subtle shift in her eyes, the way she shifted uncomfortably under my gaze. She wasn't used to me being direct. Not like this. It wasn't how I had been. I had always been the quiet one, the one who tried to make things work without confrontation. But that was before I knew the truth. "I feel it too," she said softly, as though it was something she'd been meaning to say, but had been avoiding. She didn't meet my eyes, instead looking at the bedspread, her fingers toying with the fabric. Maybe, maybe it's just the stress of everything. You know, work, life. I couldn't hold back anymore. "Is that really it, Rachel?" The words were out before I could stop them, my voice harder than I intended. I watched her flinch, her eyes flickering to mine, and for a moment I thought she might break. She might confess, might tell me the truth. But she didn't. Instead, she just nodded, her eyes diverting again. "Yeah, I guess. It's just been a lot." There it was again. The lie. The avoidance. I felt my pulse quicken, the anger surging back, but I held it in. I couldn't confront her right now. Not yet. I stood up from the bed, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm going to take a walk," I said. "Clear my head." She looked at me for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, but we'll talk, right? About all of this?" I didn't answer right away. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? The truth was already clear, and there was no going back from it. I walked out of the room, leaving Rachel behind in the bed, her words hanging in the air, unspoken and unfinished. As I stepped into the hallway, I felt the weight of the decision I would soon have to make. But for now, I had to figure out what to do next. What did I want from this? Did I even want to stay in this marriage? I wasn't sure anymore. I stepped out into the cool morning air, the crispness of it cutting through the fog of confusion that had settled in my mind. The city was waking up slowly, the streets still mostly empty, but the sounds of the world outside felt oddly distant. The truth, as painful as it was, had broken through the facade of my everyday life. And now everything I thought I knew about Rachel, about us, was in question. I couldn't escape it. It clung to me like a shadow. I walked aimlessly, not caring about where my feet took me. The streets were unfamiliar, but nothing felt familiar anymore. The pain in my chest felt like a knot, tight and unyielding. Rachel had betrayed me, and I was left to pick up the pieces of a marriage that now felt like a lie. As I walked, my mind replayed the events of the last 24 hours. The messages, the photos, the stolen moments between Rachel and Mark, ones that I had never been a part of, that I hadn't even known existed. The more I thought about it, the more my mind spun. I couldn't understand how this had happened. Rachel was the woman I had married, the one I had built a life with, but now she was someone else entirely. The woman I thought I knew was just a version of herself, one that had been hiding behind a mask for all this time. I found myself at a small park, sitting on a bench by the pond, staring at the still water. My thoughts were scattered, my heart racing. What was I supposed to do now? Confront her? Leave? Or was I supposed to pretend like nothing had changed, let it all go, and try to move on as if everything was normal? But how could I? How could I pretend when every glance at her now felt like a betrayal? I thought back to the moments that had felt so perfect. Our honeymoon, those lazy afternoons spent in each other's company, the laughter, the intimacy. It had all been real, hadn't it? Or was I just fooling myself believing in a fairy tale? Maybe I had been too trusting. Maybe Rachel was never the woman I thought she was. But then again, how could I not have seen it? How could I have missed the signs? The cracks had always been there, but I had chosen not to look at them. As I sat there trying to make sense of everything, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw Rachel's name on the screen. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't want to answer. I didn't want to hear her voice. Not yet. But I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. With a deep breath, I pressed the button to accept the call. "Hey," she said, her voice tentative. There was an edge to it, like she knew something was wrong, like she could sense the distance between us. "Are you okay?" I clenched my jaw, trying to steady myself. "I'm fine," I said, my voice coming out colder than I intended. "Are you sure?" she pressed. "You seemed off this morning. You've been distant. Is something wrong?" I could hear the concern in her voice, but it only made me angrier. She didn't even know the half of it. The lies, the secrets. It all felt suffocating. "Nothing's wrong," I said again, trying to sound convincing, though I knew I wasn't. "Just needed some time to think." She was quiet for a moment, then sighed. "I get it. You're upset, and I understand. I should have been more open with you, but I swear, there's nothing going on. You have to trust me." Trust, the word that had always been the foundation of our marriage. But now it felt hollow. It was just another word, empty and meaningless in the face of what I knew. "I don't know if I can anymore," I said quietly, the words escaping before I could stop them. The silence on the other end of the line felt like an eternity. I don't know what you mean," Rachel said, her voice trembling slightly. "What's going on, really? Why are you acting like this?" I took a deep breath, my mind racing with 1,000 things I could say, but I couldn't bring myself to confront her yet. Not like this. Not on the phone. "I'll be home later," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "We'll talk then." "Okay, okay," she replied, her voice small now. "Please just come back soon. We need to fix this." I hung up before she could say anything else, feeling the weight of the conversation settle heavily on my shoulders. I stood up from the bench, my legs stiff from sitting too long, and started walking again, needing to clear my head. The park felt like a different world now, one that didn't belong to me anymore. Everything I had known had shifted, and I was struggling to find my footing. I couldn't go back home yet, not until I had some answers, not until I had figured out what I wanted from all of this. Part of me wanted to confront Rachel right now, to tear through the lies and demand the truth. But another part of me, maybe the part that still cared about her, the part that was still clinging to the hope that we could fix this, knew I needed more time. The truth hurt, but it wasn't enough to just know it. I needed to understand everything, why she had done this, why she had kept it from me for so long. What had I missed? What had gone wrong? I knew I couldn't stay in this limbo forever, but I also knew that if I didn't find some peace with myself, I wouldn't be able to face her. And that was the hardest part of all, facing her. Because in some twisted way, I still loved her. I still cared about her. But could I ever trust her again? The rest of the day passed in a haze. I wandered through the city, not really paying attention to anything, just trying to outrun the thoughts that were chasing me. Every place I went, I felt her shadow following me, even though I was miles away. It was like I couldn't escape her, couldn't escape the feeling of betrayal that hung over everything we had built. Rachel's voice echoed in my mind, the pleading tone, the promises to fix things. But I didn't know if I believed her anymore. How could I? The phone call had only made things worse. I could hear the desperation in her voice, but it wasn't enough to erase what I knew. She had been lying to me for so long, keeping secrets, hiding things that were far beyond just a fleeting moment of weakness. It was a betrayal that went deeper than I had imagined, and it was hard to wrap my mind around it. How had she been able to live this double life, to make me feel like everything was fine when she had been keeping this from me? When I finally made my way back to the hotel, the weight of the situation pressed down on me with full force. I could hear Rachel moving around inside the room before I even opened the door. Her footsteps were quick, almost nervous. The tension in the air was palpable, and I knew we were about to have the conversation that had been hanging between us like an invisible thread, ready to snap. I stepped inside and Rachel was sitting on the bed, her eyes a little red, like she had been crying. She looked up at me, her face a mixture of concern and guilt. It made my stomach churn. I wasn't sure if she was sorry because she had been caught, or if she was genuinely remorseful for what she had done. But at this point, it didn't matter. "Hi," she said, her voice small, hesitant. I didn't respond immediately. I was still trying to hold it together, to not let my emotions take control. But they were bubbling up, threatening to spill over, and I knew if I didn't speak soon, I wouldn't be able to hold it in any longer. "Rachel, I need to know the truth," I said, my voice more firm than I intended. I stood in the doorway, refusing to step closer. The space between us, the physical distance, felt necessary now. She looked down at her hands, wringing them in her lap. "I know I've messed up. I, I never wanted you to find out this way." I shook my head. "It's not just the way I found out, Rachel. It's the fact that you were hiding it from me all this time. You've been lying to me for months. You've been meeting him. You've been—" I couldn't even finish the sentence. The words felt like a weight in my throat. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered, her voice breaking. She stood up but didn't move toward me. Instead, she just stood there looking at me, searching my face as if trying to find a way back into my good graces. "I don't know what happened. It wasn't planned. It just happened." "Don't give me that," I snapped, my patience fraying. "It just happened? You've been meeting him, talking to him, sneaking around behind my back? How can you say it just happened? How do you explain all the time you spent with him? The dinners? The messages?" She took a shaky breath, as though she was gathering the courage to admit something else, something that might break me even more. "I never stopped loving him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It hit me like a punch to the stomach. My breath caught in my throat and I stared at her, trying to comprehend what she had just said. I wanted to scream, to run, to get away from this reality that I hadn't asked for. But I couldn't. The words hung in the air between us, each one like a stone sinking deeper into the pit of my stomach. I thought that if I could just ignore it, if I could just put it behind me, we'd be okay, she continued. But I couldn't. I kept thinking about him, and I couldn't stop myself. I could barely hear her anymore. My head was spinning. How could she say she loved me? How could she sit here and say those words after everything? I wasn't sure what was worse, the affair itself, or the fact that she had so little regard for me, for our life together, that she had continued to betray me, to deceive me with such ease. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you just leave me if you felt that way?" The words felt like a bitter venom on my tongue. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said, her voice pleading now. "I didn't want to destroy what we had, but I didn't know what to do either. I felt trapped, like I was living two lives." I couldn't believe her. I didn't know if she was still lying, or if she had just convinced herself that her actions were somehow justifiable. The thought of her with him, the intimacy, the shared moments, was suffocating. I couldn't erase it from my mind. I didn't want to. I didn't want to be this man, the one who was so broken that I could barely speak to her without feeling like I was being suffocated by her lies. "Are you still seeing him?" I asked, my voice low but sharp. She hesitated, her eyes shifting to the side, as though she couldn't bear to look at me. "No," she said finally, though I could hear the doubt in her voice. "Not anymore." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust her again. But how could I? I didn't know what was real anymore. What was she hiding? What else had she lied about? I ran a hand through my hair, trying to steady myself. "I don't know what to do with this, Rachel. I don't know what to do with you." I could see the tears welling up in her eyes, her lips trembling as she fought to keep herself together. But it was too late. The damage had been done. The woman I had married, the woman I had thought I knew, was no longer the person standing in front of me. She had already slipped away piece by piece, until all that remained was a shell, a ghost of what we once had. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never wanted this." I looked at her, and for the first time in years I felt nothing. No love, no anger, just emptiness. I wasn't sure what was worse, The betrayal or the fact that I didn't know if I could ever feel anything for her again. I need to think, I said, my voice flat. I need time. She nodded, tears streaming down her face as she sat back down on the bed. Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I walked out of the room, my heart heavy with the weight of what I had learned. I wasn't sure if there was any coming back from this, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to try. I sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of the situation pressing on me like a physical force. Rachel stood at the other side of the room, her eyes bloodshot, red from crying, her hands trembling as she fidgeted with the hem of her shirt. We both knew what was coming, and yet the air between us felt thick, suffocating. The truth had been laid bare, but there were still so many unspoken words, so many emotions that neither of us had dared to name. I had spent the entire day wrestling with myself. I had walked aimlessly around the city, trying to make sense of the situation, trying to find some shred of clarity in the chaos. But the truth was that nothing made sense. Rachel's infidelity was one thing, but the lies, the secrets, the realization that our entire relationship might have been a facade was another. I could feel her eyes on me, waiting, hoping that I would speak first. But I was lost in my own thoughts, lost in the anger and the hurt that had taken root in my chest. How had I not seen it? How had I allowed her to deceive me for so long? I thought we had something real. I thought we were building a life together. But now I felt like I had been living in a house of cards, waiting for it to collapse. She finally broke the silence, her voice shaking. What are you going to do? Her question hung in the air like a fragile thread, waiting to snap. I didn't answer immediately. I couldn't. The truth was, I didn't know what I was going to do. Part of me wanted to walk out of this hotel room, leave everything behind, and never look back. I had the power to walk away, to erase Rachel from my life entirely. But another part of me, one I hated, still cared about her, still wanted to believe that we could somehow fix this. I don't know, I said quietly, my voice distant. I rubbed my temples, trying to relieve the pressure building inside my head. I don't know if I can do this anymore. I don't know if I can keep pretending that everything's fine when I know the truth. Rachel took a tentative step toward me, but I held up my hand, stopping her. I needed space, needed distance from her. I don't want to hear the excuses, Rachel, I said, my voice rough. I don't want to hear how sorry you are. I don't care about your reasons anymore. I care about the fact that you betrayed me. You chose him. You chose lying to me over being honest. And I can't ignore that. She flinched at the harshness of my words, and for a moment I almost regretted them. But then I remembered the secret messages, the stolen hours. I remembered the way she had looked at me these past few days, distant, cold, as if I were a stranger. And the regret melted away, replaced by a hard, bitter truth. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. I don't expect you to stay, but please believe me when I say it wasn't about you. It wasn't about how I felt about you. It was, I don't know, I lost myself. I lost sight of everything that mattered. Then maybe you weren't ever really with me in the first place, I shot back, the words coming out sharper than I intended. Maybe I was just the guy who was there, the safe option. But you've made your choice now, and you can't go back. Her face crumpled, and fresh tears welled up in her eyes. But I couldn't comfort her. I couldn't be the man she needed me to be in that moment. I wasn't even sure who I was anymore. I don't know what to do, she said, voice breaking. I love you, but I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to fix me. I let out a long breath and stood up, pacing the room. I can't fix you either. I can't fix what you've done. You've crossed a line, Rachel, and now I'm the one who has to figure out how to live with it. She was silent for a moment, and then, with a voice full of resolve, she said, I don't want to lose you. Then maybe you should have thought about that before, I replied coldly. Before you chose to betray me, before you thought you could play this game with my life. I could feel my heart breaking with each word, but I couldn't stop myself. The anger was too much, the hurt too deep. I had loved Rachel more than anything. She had been my everything. But she had chosen someone else. And now all that was left was the wreckage. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of her soft sobs and the ticking of the clock on the wall. It felt like a lifetime, like I had been here for years instead of just a few minutes. Finally, I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in so long, I saw her for who she was. The woman who had loved me once, but had also betrayed me in ways I couldn't even fully comprehend yet. There was no going back from this. The trust was shattered, the foundation of our marriage had crumbled, and all we were left with was the rubble of what used to be. I walked toward the door, my hand on the handle. Rachel called out my name, but I didn't turn around. There was nothing left to say. No more tears to shed, no more apologies to hear. "I'm done," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. And with that, I stepped out of the room, leaving everything behind. There was no going back from this. The man who had entered that room, the one who still believed in the woman he married, was gone. What remained was just a shell of someone who had been broken and betrayed. As I walked down the hallway, I didn't feel free. I didn't feel relief.